Thank you very much. Now, the intention of the session like this is really to get the questions answered. And we just spent a few minutes offline doing that. We're now recording the session. But the purpose of what we're about to get into, sometimes we have town halls with residents. And so my boss warned me, because she does a lot of them, and she said, just be prepared for crickets. And I was like, no, I am not prepared for crickets. I'm showing up here. What I have is a canned presentation, in that this is information I share repeatedly, but I'm going to start sharing this with you because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you just need to hear the facts and the details, and that will generate your questions. That will help you better know where you need to go, either in your actions or in your line of questioning with me. So I'm just going to take the time to educate you on what is, on where you should be based on your financial goals, and we will get through this together. And of course, I welcome throughout this entire time you to ask questions. So what we're going to work through during this time together is everything from where to start in the successful manage of your student loans during training and beyond, all the way down to refinancing, and then everything in between, whether it be postponement of payments to making payments, how to make payments, or which plan is the best to make payments in, down to public service loan forgiveness, which we just talked about a bit, and we'll talk about it a bit more. But I will tell you that the best takeaway when it comes to accessing one single consolidated resource that explains everything related to student loan management is this, the Education Debt Manager, the EDM, AAMC.org/first/EDM. It is everything I'm going to talk about today in paragraph form, in a downloadable PDF, plus some. So there's more content in there than you could even want. So if you read it from front to back, you will be completely financially literate in what you need to know to be a good consumer and payer of student loans. Now, having said that, and giving you that takeaway that you can go access on your own, I would just let you know that we have a number of other videos that we've posted on topics that are very relevant to where you are at in life, whether it be financial planning, which it sounds like you're going to have an expert come and speak to you during this topic in the series that you're going through. But we do have some financial planning resources. We have some home financing resources. We have a calculator that can help those of you who are married best understand, or looking to be married in the future, how your spouse's income and debt may impact your repayment of your student loans, because it will have an impact, or it definitely could. And again, more videos and webinars on related topics that you may find valuable depending on where you're at. So to begin, let's look at some numbers. So here's where we're at, the state of medical education debt. Right now, what we know most recently is across the country. In fact, I'll tell you a little thing we haven't released. Class of 2019, we assimilated all of the responses from the graduates, and the median level of debt for 2019 grads was $200,000, which was, for the first time in quite some time, the exact same level of debt, median level of debt, as the class of 2018. They were both $200,000. So that is undergrad and medical school debt, self-reported by the grads. 2018 to 2019 saw no rise in the self-reported numbers. And I said self-reported like 3 times because, of course, when you self-report your debt level or any number, there is a margin of error. So that's not an official number that was verified with the Department of Education or any financial aid office. This is just one of our measures. And so we're looking at $200,000 of debt across the country, whether the MD grad left a public or private MD granting institution. That's where we're at. Now, DOs left it a little bit higher of average, but nonetheless, I just share these numbers with you to realize the majority of all medical grads are leaving with education debt. The management of student loans is something that is common amongst your peers, and this trend will simply continue. Now, how I'm going to go about this, just presenting the information, is I've highlighted in an orderly fashion 5 of the questions we receive most often. And I'm going to just take the question that is asked of me in one way, shape, or form, and put one here, like where do I start? How do I not miss some of my management of some loans? And I'm going to break the questions down, answer it, and then move to the next question. Again, feel free to jump in and ask your own. But as far as making sure you are dealing with everything you borrowed during your entire education process, I just want to, and I cannot emphasize enough, NSLDS. You have to log into nslds.ed.gov and see the complete and entire list of all of the federal loans you've ever borrowed. Now, while you are there, there is a link at the very top of the screen that looks a little bit like this little symbol that says My Student Data Download. Click that button because it's going to export your file of the monies you have borrowed, and it's going to be important to upload in a resource I'll talk to you about in just a second. But inside of the NSLDS account that you have, if you were a federal student loan borrower, there are some details you're going to want to be aware of. And I'm pretty sure with where you're at in your management of student loans now, just simply the fact that you are not in medical school anymore, you already know these details to an extent, with the most important one being either in your mailbox, in your email box, or maybe even on the phone with you, and that's the servicer. You have to know who the servicer of each and every single one of your loans is, because the servicer is your point of contact. If you have questions about your student loans, you're calling your servicer. And like I said, they're probably already to a degree in your face because they're communicating with you regarding some of the questions that they need you to answer, some of the decisions you have to select from. And we'll talk about those decisions and which ones might be best for you. But nonetheless, all of your federal loans are in your NSLDS account. You need to go there, export that file, and take a peek and be aware of who your loan servicers are. And once you know who your servicers are, know that you just can simply log into the online account they have for you so you can see exactly where that level of debt might be today. And what I mean by that is you can see exactly how much you owe at this very moment, down to the penny, if that's of any interest to you. But other debt, because I'm very familiar that there is a small portion of students who go through the borrowing process during medical school and the education, taking out other kinds of loans. So if you took out other kinds of loans, whether it be private debt or institutional loans, that debt will not be in NSLDS, it'll be on your credit report. So just to be thorough, take a stop at annualcreditreport.com, log in, you're going to, for free, see your credit report, and actually you'll see 3 if you would like, and you should go ahead and take a look at all 3 because there's 3 credit bureaus. And what you're looking for is, well, any federal loans that, let me say it different, any student loan that wasn't in NSLDS. Just be sure you are managing everything, because the thing about it is medical grads pay their debt, they pay it back, they pay it on time, if not faster than's asked, unless something slips through the cracks. So don't let anything slip through the cracks. Now, having said that, I'll say what you have seen, depending on where you're at in your experience, you definitely have noticed or will, if you're a class of 2019, that there was interest accrual on the loans you borrowed during medical school. And that accrued interest, it sat off to the side in a pile while you were in medical school. But now, I'm going to speak to the class of 2019 because I know there's probably a plethora of different graduating years in here. But class of 2019, what they're going through right in this moment, if they had borrowed that $200,000 during class of 2019's 4 years at the interest rates that they had for those 4 years, they're looking at a pile of $30,000 of interest. So think about back to your graduating year, and just know that those 4 years leading up to your graduating year, you too accrued a pile of interest that capitalized in November of your graduating year. That's the standard time for that interest from medical school to become a part of the original principal balance. So then you moved on into your training process with this larger pile of debt, and you're now accruing interest on interest, because your medical school interest is now accruing its own interest to a degree during training and beyond. So just understand that capitalization, the first big capitalization happens at the end of your graduating year, and then when's the next one? Because that's really key for you. When are your next capitalizations occurring? Well, that's going to come down to how do you choose to manage your loans. So are you postponing payments? Are you making payments? If you're making payments, which payment plan are you choosing to do that in? Because each of those tiny details is going to be able to let you know, or I could even tell you when your next capitalization will be. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but just understand that when I say the level of interest you have capitalized is completely based on how much money you borrowed while you were in medical school. And it is very common for students to graduate, leave, and go on into training and begin or continue to accrue in interest $1,000 or more per month. I just want to put that out there. That is normal. The majority of medical grads leave medical school with education debt. Nearly half of those, over half of those, have over $200,000. So it's simply, the fact of the matter is, normal to be accruing interest. Your debt is growing like a snowball for a time period, for right now. Once you see that bump in income when training's over, then you will begin to melt, if you will, that snowball of debt. But this is just the way the world works. This is where we're at. And as your income increases, you will see the interest accrual begin to stop, because you're going to start paying down the principal balance of your loans. Now, one of the questions I often get when we start really, getting into the details of interest accrual is a lot of, let's just say, very thoughtful questions about how you could potentially get around interest capitalization. And so let me just tell you, don't waste your time. There is no trick. There is no loophole. Your interest on your loans is always ultimately going to capitalize. Typically, best case scenario, worst case scenario, we're looking at annual capitalizations. If not more, and I'll tell you when an even worse situation could happen, but worst case scenario, annual capitalizations. But then there's some options where you could postpone capitalization of unpaid interest for years, if not forevermore. Just putting this out there, repay payment plan never has capitalization of unpaid interest. So I'm just gonna put that out there in case that means anything to any of you who might be in repay. But let me tell you, what you can do to reduce capitalization and minimize the impact of accruing interest is, whenever you're able, understand it is your right to make voluntary payments. You can send your servicer monies they're not asking for, and then tell the servicer how to apply it. Meaning, tell them, take this $100 and apply it to my most expensive loan. So identify what your highest interest rate loan is in your student loan portfolio, and follow up and make sure that they did that. And what that payment is going to do is go and reduce the pile of unpaid interest that is likely sitting in your account right now, and stop it from capitalizing. It's going to stop interest from capitalizing and then earning its own interest. So that is something, that is a right you have. It is not a right that your servicers are reaching out and telling you about. So I want to be sure you know that. Yeah, go ahead. How often does it capitalize when it's in forbearance? It can be postponed until the very end of the very last increment of forbearance, as long as you request the next increment of forbearance 30 days before the current increment expires. Because what you're trying to do is keep your postponement status going smoothly from year to year to year. But if there's a break there because you didn't submit your paperwork on time, interest will capitalize unnecessarily, but that's pretty avoidable, considering that when you're in a forbearance, all you're really signing up to do is one time per year submit some paperwork on time. That's it. If you do any more voluntary payments like this, which could be done potentially, great, but yeah, you can avoid capitalization of interest until your residency is over. Now, if you go on into fellowship, there is not a postponement with a forbearance. There is a postponement with a deferment. So there will be capitalization once you get to that last increment of forbearance and you come out of residency and go into the next whatever you choose. So just know that forbearance capitalization could be postponed for the whole entire residency time, 3, 4, 5 years, but it will happen eventually. There's no way to get around it unless you do this, pay it down and stop it from capitalizing. Now, I know I'm pie in the sky kind of talking when I'd say you make payments while you're in training. I do not mean to intend to tell you that this happens often. I simply want you to know it's your right, so that whenever you want to make a big impact on your education debt and pay it off quickly, you can do so on your own accord. Just send that money in with instructions and make sure the servicer applies it right, and that saves you time as far as getting your loans paid off faster and money. Enough said, you understand where we're going with that. Now, just to further explain capitalization, I want you to be clear on when it's happening in your portfolios, because sometimes you make mistakes and you cause it to happen earlier. Like if you were to potentially request a status late and you cause a break between what could have been a smooth period, forbearance to forbearance to forbearance from year to year to year, that could have been smooth. You could have avoided capitalization. But let's say you just are jumping around. You're like, oh, I'm going to forbear. And then you realize, no, I want to make payments. And you ask for a payment plan. And then you get into November, holidays come. And you're like, no, I think I want postpone November, December, January while I ride this holiday expense out, and then you get back into another payment plan and come February. The problem with that kind of thinking, by changing status on the loans repeatedly, is that every time the status of your loans change, you cause interest that was unpaid and accrued and off to the side to capitalize. So try to choose the best strategy up front so that you don't cost yourself more in the long run. And just know, if you need to change status, that definitely can be done, but try to be strategic about it so that you aren't paying hundreds or thousands of dollars more simply because of interest. Now, this is a little bit I'm throwing out generalities. Like in general, you could be accruing $1,000. The thing about it is your portfolio can help you specifically know what you're going to be accruing by uploading that file. That file you downloaded from NSLDS, pull that into MedLoans Organizer and Calculator, AAMC.org/MedLoans, and now this general overview I'm giving turns into numbers, and things become a lot more clear about what's a good idea for you and what's not a good idea. Yes, you had a question. I'm sorry, I just wanted to finish my thought before we went down your path. Go ahead. I'm sorry? Oh yeah, at the end of your graduating year, so November of your graduating year is when student loan borrowers see their first big capitalization. Yes. And then the policy for pay as you earn is that interest will capitalize as soon as, we're going into a lot of detail here, but you'll hang with me and you'll see this when you run your numbers in the MedLoans Organizer and Calculator, as soon as you no longer have a partial financial hardship. So PFH, this is actually a level of detail I didn't intend to go to, but I will because it's going to help me show you where capitalization will happen if you're in pay. PFH, a partial financial hardship, exists in your account whenever, get this, whenever your education debt, think about your education debt. What's that total? Principal and interest. What is that number? Now think about your annual income. Whenever your education debt number is greater than your annual income, there is, in general, this is just a general rule of thumb, a PFH, a partial financial hardship. The majority of medical grads for some time show a PFH. So they have this partial financial hardship. While in order to get into pay, you have to have a partial financial hardship. It will be when your income increases so much so that you no longer qualify for a lower monthly payment, and you are now paying what is equivalent to what your 10-year standard payment would have been. So that's going to make more sense when I get into breaking down the repayment plans. But I will tell you that a 10-year standard payment plan, if you had borrowed $200,000 during medical school, would be approximately $2,600. And you'll see in your MedLoans Organizer and Calculator what your 10-year standard payment amount would be if you chose that plan. And then you'll also see where you're at with your pay payments. So you'll know how much room you have there before your capitalization occurs, before you lose your PFH. So you lose your interest, in a sense, in pay. Your interest will capitalize once you no longer show a hardship. So once your income goes up, eventually you're going to have the interest capitalized. Unless you pay it down before that happens. But there's not a lot of strategy in doing that necessarily, because there's other things you could be doing with those finances. Don't want to go too far down that road without talking about postponing. So postponing is always an option you have. As a medical grad who is in some form of training, you can, we've already talked about forbearance, we talked about deferment, talked about residency, fellowship. Either of the two options qualify you for the ability to tell your servicers, I do not want to make payments. But that's the thing. You have to tell your servicer, I do not want to make payments. You have to fill out paperwork. You have to do it in a timely manner, because if you do not, there are negative ramifications of that. But know that you don't have to make any payments the entire time you're in training. Just once a year, fill out the appropriate paperwork. The mandatory medical residency forbearance, which is the one her and I just talked about, will allow you to postpone capitalization until you're done with residency. And that last increment of forbearance expires. So if that's the path you've chosen to be on, commit to it, fill out your paperwork on time, 30 days before your current increment expires. That's what on time is with student loans. 30 days before you need it, do it. and now you're on time. And then that way you will avoid interest capitalizing sooner than it would have. And having said that, I want to explain to you that postponing payments is a good idea. It's a great idea sometimes. What are those sometimes? Well, if there's anything in your life, financially speaking, that is a priority that you are wanting to accomplish, then it makes sense for you to postpone payments on your federal loans so you can focus your time, attention, and money on accomplishing something else over here. Whatever that is, that something else might be repaying private loans, paying down credit cards you might have run up while you were doing interviews for residency. That something else might be taking care of your family because it's you, your spouse, and your children all living on your income. So the something else, whatever it is, if it makes sense to postpone payments on your federal loans, understand interest is always accruing even while you're postponing, but if you go into the situation of choosing a postponement to accomplish another financial goal, that makes good sense. Now here's when it doesn't make sense, and this is when it could detrimentally hurt you, and especially if you're pursuing PSLF. There are some forgiveness programs that require you to actively be making required monthly payments. You have to be in a repayment plan. And if you choose to postpone payments and then voluntarily send in monies, that's typically always an option you have on the table. But know that that option to postpone payments and then just voluntarily send in whatever you want, whenever you want, that works, but it doesn't work in accomplishing a forgiveness. Public service loan forgiveness, none of those payments count. Income-driven repayment plans, we're going to talk about those in a second. There are a number of plans that you could choose to pay under where once you hit 20 or 25-year term, whatever's left is forgiven. We'll talk about the terms of that in a second though, but the fact of the matter is you have to be in those required plans to experience the forgiveness. You can't just be making voluntary payments. So who does it not make sense to postpone payments for? If there's any part of your heart and your mind that has a goal of obtaining some forgiveness that's based on some of the federal programs, postponing required payments is not a good idea, especially not now while you're in training. And having said that, I'll say, again, like I said earlier before we started, you make the best decision you can, knowing what you know in the moment, and if things change, literally what you do is call the servicer and change your chosen strategy. You go from that repayment plan into postponement or vice versa. Understand though, when you make changes like that, interest that was unpaid in that moment will capitalize with that status change. Now, if you did choose to postpone payments for 4 years, like I said earlier, while you're postponing payments, interest is accruing. Now you are federal loan borrowers, so you always have the right, the entitlement to send in monies if you'd like. You can do that. Your servicers, they're not allowed to kick you out of the postponement option just because you sent in some money some random month. But if you chose not to make any payments, this would be the impact. After 4 years where you'd borrowed $200,000 during medical school, which capped into $230,000, 4 years of postponing payments, at the end of that 4th year, you now have a pile of about on its way to $60,000 capitalized as you transition out of residency and into wherever you're going next. Maybe you're going on into private practice. Maybe you're going to work in public service. Maybe you're going on in training at some other institution. Nonetheless, you're carrying with you $287,000. Now this $287,000, now that residency is over, let's say you're done with training, you're done postponing, you get to choose how to make payments on that $287,000. And if you see the first column here are the many different plans you have to choose from. When you upload your portfolio into the MedLoans Organizer and Calculator, you have the ability to tell the calculator, I want to postpone for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Here's a hint. If you are planning on fellowship and residency, add those numbers together and put that number into the calculator so you can get the closest estimates on what it would look like to postpone payments for that entire amount of time. But nonetheless, it will also show you what your options are after the postponement is over, after your training is over. And so you can see here there's a variety of options to pay. Now, mind you, your income is significant because now all training is over. So you can choose to pick a plan where you're focusing on the lowest monthly payment that's consistently lower than all the other plans, and that's extended. It's 25 years. You see the problem with that is though that total repayment cost is over $500,000. So maybe the total repayment cost is actually your main priority, and that's where your eyes are drawn when you look at repayment costs. So then you find the one that costs the least, which in this case it was income contingent. And fact of the matter is this: I can and could and we could talk about each and every one of these plans and how they work and what they look like if you do this or don't do that. But by uploading your details of your loans into the calculator, it's going to show you these results for you. And once you see those results, that is what it is. You don't need to understand it. It is what it is. I mean, of course, you may have a question like, why is this way and that plan's that way? Well, I could tell you, but the fact of the matter is, this is this way and that is that way. So I'm saying all that to tell you that I do this full time and I still have to run numbers in the calculator before I can tell anyone what their best plan is. And often it's just a matter of uploading the portfolio, taking a peek. I know that they're looking for the plan that takes the least amount of time and costs them the less, and then boom, I have an answer. And sometimes that's good enough because now they have a goal and now they know what to do. And that's what all you need to do is run your numbers in the calculator. And if you have questions from those results, you are welcome to email us at first@aamc.org. We'll help you understand the results so you can get into the best plan in an educated way. But nonetheless, that is available to you at any point in time. Now, having said all that, I really was going over the postponement option. Are there any questions about not making payments before I talk a little bit about the plans and highlight one that might be better for you because it could help you save thousands and thousands of dollars in interest? Anybody know which plan I'm talking about? Because you're in it, because you're smart and you chose it already? Repay. Repay does cut the accruing interest that's growing on your account off to the side in a pile in half every single month that you're in repay. So remember that stat I said, it's not uncommon for somebody during training to be accruing $1,000 or more per month in interest. Well, if that person was accruing $1,000, but they're in repay, it's now $500 they're responsible for because the other $500 just disappeared. I oversimplify the process, but nonetheless, repay, if you haven't seen what it could do for your portfolio, the calculator will make it most clear when you run it. So what's the best repayment plan? This is the number one question we get at the AAMC. One of the things I do is I travel to graduating classes as they're leaving fourth year, and we have a similar conversation. It's a little more in detail, a little more depth, it's a little longer, but the fact of the matter is all they want to know is this: which plan should I be in? How do I do this? What's the best way? And because goals and life situations, scenarios, debt portfolios, professional desires and paths are all so very different, you just need to know that there is no one best way. What I have to ask back to the individuals asking this in a one-on-one kind of scenario, not in a group session, is, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? What's most important to you during these first few years post-graduation? And then that conversation leads to, are you interested in public service loan forgiveness? And then that leads to narrowing down where you should go or shouldn't go, because those types of questions make it more clear about what you should or shouldn't do. So postponing payments, if your goal is to pursue PSLF while you're in training, to postpone payments with a deferment or forbearance, bad idea. Like right away, we can mark that off the list. And now we know we just need to look at payment plans. Which plan makes the best sense for you? So then we start narrowing down the plans that cost you the least. So you see how this conversation goes, and because you have the Medloans organizer and calculator, you can to some degree figure out what your block that fits into your best case scenario looks like. Now with that, let me say that the goals of, your goals is what determines what the best plan is. And so what are your goals? What are they right now? Just mentally evaluate. My goal is to, or maybe you don't even know because you haven't asked yourself that yet. You have to set some intentions with your financial priorities. So in regards to your student loans, what do you intend to accomplish in this year, in these years? Because really at the end of the day, it's either one or the other. So we have two ways we can go. We can either be aggressive and get rid of this debt as fast as possible, and that's going to have us leading towards this left-hand side of the screen in blue, or let's just say I'll tell you that this being aggressive and getting rid of debt as quick as possible often requires funding that's simply not available at this point in time because income levels aren't where they need to be or will be. So during this point in time, we might be in the immediate future here, looking at the best way to minimize our monthly payments, but doing so in a way that doesn't hurt us and cause unnecessary capitalization down the road. And so these are the two columns that you fall into. And I'll tell you that inside of these columns, the first one, the aggressive one, where you're paying significant amount, you're doing so in what we call traditional plans. And I'll just tell you, traditional plans, the focus on these plans is all about what's your debt level. Because that number, whatever it is, you drop it into these plans and it's going to spit out a monthly payment amount and a term. So the first one is the 10-year standard payment amount. You will pay every single month for 10 years the same amount, and at the end of the 10th year, you will have repaid the debt in full. Extended is a 25-year plan. Every single month, the same amount. It's a lower amount, you see that? Well, that's because it's longer term. Longer with student loans is not always better. A longer term means that you let your principal balance sit out there and accrue interest for a greater amount of time. Said another way, you just cost yourself more in interest. These are simple interest loans. Every day that it takes you to repay the balance in full, more interest will grow on what you have yet to pay. So being aggressive can save you money because, well, you stop accruing interest, let alone get rid of the debt you have. Graduate is a great plan, except it's only low or appears lower than the other two for the first 2 years, where it's interest only. And on that note, when you're in the Medloans Organizer and Calculator and you're wondering how much interest am I accruing each month? Well, look to see what your graduated payment plan amount says it would be. That's how much interest you are accruing every single month. And know that if you went into the graduated plan, that's what you pay for the first 2 years, but the last 8 years, because it's a 10-year term, the payment jumps up significantly because you only have 8 years left to pay the debt off in full. So we don't see many graduates in any one of these plans. Where we see medical grads paying during training is in the income-driven plans. It's all about your income level, not your debt level. And so this is where affordability can be found. And I'll tell you, these plans, they are based on the income as reported on your taxes from the prior year. So you have to give your servicers access to your tax records. And then each year you also have to give your servicers a verification of how large or small your family size is. And that will allow them to redetermine for the next 12 months what your payment will be in the income-driven plan. Now, what you see here, ICR at the top, that's 20% of your discretionary income. And without going into too much details, I'll just say the Department of Ed, let me say it different. The formula that your servicer is using that's been created in essence or written into statute by the Department of Ed says that with income contingent, you will turn in your tax numbers to the servicer. The servicer will look at your adjusted gross income. They will subtract from the adjusted gross income the amount that is equivalent to the poverty guideline for where you live and how large your family size is. So they subtract the poverty guideline from your AGI, and the number that's left over, that's called discretionary income. And that leftover money, your extra money, is then multiplied with ICR by 20%, in IBR by 15%, and with pay and repay, it's 10%. And that's why pay and repay show the lowest monthly payments, is because the formula is smaller. But again, all of this is based on your AGI as reported to the IRS each year. And what else to tell you about this? The terms, pay as you earn is a 20-year term, repay is a 25-year term. You get to the end of those terms and you will experience forgiveness on any balance that you had yet to pay or still owed, but it's a taxable forgiveness. And that means that, let's say you had $100,000 forgiven. It will look like in that year, that 20th year or the 25th year, it looks like you made an extra $100,000. So there's a tax bill that goes with that. But here's the other thing about that. Sure that's right. Just hearing that there's a tax bill is kind of like, oh, it's a little deflating. It's not a true forgiveness. It's not a completely free forgiveness. But know this, having that amount of debt forgiven at the end of the 20th year, even with a tax bill, can often still outperform or still offer you the lowest total repayment cost compared to the other repayment plans. And on top of that, you have 20 years to plan for that tax bill. So it's not something that's going to blindside you in 20 years. And now I will move on and just say the calculator will help you know, if you chose an income-driven plan, exactly how much you could expect in 20 or 25 years to have forgiven if you stayed in those plans for the entire time. And I will show you a few little case studies. If you had graduated from medical school with the $200,000 that we've been talking about, because that was the median education debt that's most recently reported, and you went into a 3-year residency where you would come out making $180,000 afterwards, what we would focus in on is during your time in training, as far as how you would manage the monies immediately after graduation, we're going to just focus in on the ones that are most affordable. When you run the numbers in the calculator, you'll see everything all laid out at once. But if you were to postpone during those 3 years, you would see a result that's similar to this, where you would postpone for 3 years and then pay aggressive for 10 years. So once your income starts flowing after training, after residency is over, you would then pay for 10 years the $3,000 per month for that entire 10 years. You've now paid a total after graduating 13 years. You managed your debt for 13 years and the debt is gone, paid in full. And you paid $365,000, nothing was forgiven. That's one option. Or you could choose one of the affordable repayment plans while you're in residency and pay either 20 or 25 years. You pay a small, or compared to the other plans, it is a small payment amount, and it's a range. Every year, remember, your payments will get adjusted based on what your income is reported to IRS, but it's a range for those, let's see, 17 years in pay. 17 years, you're going to pay anything from $1,600 to $2,300. At the end of the 20th year, you would have paid almost $400,000 and had $70,000 forgiven. So that's what utilizing pay versus repay, similar numbers, except we don't hit a forgiveness because we don't hit 25 years. So in the 22nd year, we paid in full the entire balance, and we put towards our servicers, or sent to our servicers, $436,000. Now, when we are trying to figure out which plan's the best for us, this is where you already know what you're looking for. Your eyes, when you looked at these numbers, they gravitated there, like, ooh, well, I can tell you which plan is best. But see, the thing is, your eyes gravitated towards what's most important to you. And I don't know what that is, so I have to kind of run all over the place. The lowest amount of time is right here with forbearance, and then 10 years of aggressive payments. Or the lowest monthly payments, the most affordable from start to end, is pay as you earn, $1,600. Those are the lowest monthly payments, $1,600 to $2,300. And then the lowest amount of monies that's sent to your servicers is back to the forbearance and standard. But that's all based on $200,000. Watch what happens when I run these numbers. We are going to see the tax bill. Oh no, we didn't see the tax bill. When I change the number of the debt from $200,000 to $250,000, I get different results. And what ends up being the best payment plan, so forbearance and standard still says is the least amount of time. Pay remains our most affordable, but it also now becomes our lowest costing, simply because even with this tax bill, we are, actually that would put us almost over. If you know you're working your way towards a tax bill, here's one thing you have that you can do. Either send in extra payments towards your servicers so you never hit this forgiveness, but now it's $250,000 that's about to be forgiven. Like, ooh, that's a lot of extra payments. Okay, start saving for that tax bill so it's not a problem. There are options, but the calculator, knowing these numbers up front, means that you will be financially prepared as the moment arrives. Now, on that same note, just show you a few different other numbers. Since you don't have your numbers in front of you, longer training, greater post-training salary, greater post-training income. During that training, though, the results of borrowing $200,000 would look something like this. You have 15 years up to 20 years where the pay does hit the 20 years, but it does so in a way that we still don't have anything forgiven. What's the best in this scenario after this long training and decent income once the training is over? Well, pay could be the best, but if because you had an affordable payment those entire 20 years, or maybe you're like, no, I'd rather pay 15 years, pay a little bit more throughout those 15 years, and pay the least amount possible. There you go. This is how you start to work your way towards determining your best repayment plan. This is just, this next one is done with a higher balance and causes the repayment plan that is circled to be different. You see, the amount of time you're in training and the level of your debt cause the right plan, the best plan, to change, to adjust. You can't know the answer unless you run your numbers. And I will tell you that we've done a lot of focus groups with residents and fellows and know that absolutely positively you can afford to make payments during this time in training. But what we hear time and time again is that budgets are completely necessary to do it. Oh, that and an income-driven repayment plan. So thankfully, pay and repay are around, because when we did some of our focus groups in the beginning, we were talking about IBRs, 15% of discretionary income. But even then, the thought was it still is affordable. Just now with pay and repay, it's even a little bit more affordable. And you have to budget for the income-driven plans. It can be done. And things to know about income-driven plans, because you're going to hear about them. There's talk about changing them. There's talk about taking them away, but not completely, because there's talk about bringing one new one in that will serve everybody's needs. So what should you take from that? Nothing. There's a lot of talk. You don't have time to pay attention to talk. Do what you're doing in the way that you're doing it that's best for you. Reevaluate what plan you're in. Make sure it is the best for you. And wait until your servicer reaches out to tell you about the new plans, or until you hear about Congress agreed on something, because that will be front page. When they agree on something and they rewrite the student loan code, that will not go unnoticed, and then you can take some time and effort to pay attention. But for now, just do the plan that is obviously the best for you. Yes, question? Your situation in marriage is that your household changes, because remember we talked about income is household income. And so when you bring a spouse into the scenario, the income could change. And then if there are children, let's say there's not even children, you brought the spouse in. So now not only did the income possibly change, but the household size changed. So we have two numbers that are now going up potentially, which in income-driven terms, well, having an extra person in the house means that could drive your payment down a little bit. But then having extra income, it could increase it, because now you have extra income, meaning you could be asked to pay, well, the discretionary income is greater because you have more money, funds coming this way, so now you need to send more out. The nice thing about being married and have both of you having debt is that the servicers will look at you as one. Basically, in their head, this household is one, and the debt is one, and they will take the discretionary income, that leftover number, multiply it by, let's say pay as you earn, 10%, and whatever they come up with, say it's $1,000, the household owes. Well, that $1,000, let's say you owe 80% of the debt, and your spouse is responsible for only 20% of the household student loan debt. You send in $800 to your servicer, your spouse sends in $200 to their servicers, and that's how making payments under the income-driven plans is impacted by spouse. Now, at this point in time, if you don't want your spouse to be a part of this scenario at all, and often that comes up if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, then one option that is still on the table is to file taxes married filing separate. And then all your servicer wants to know is, what did you make? And nothing else. But married filing separate will cause your financial situation with the IRS to be, well, there's a benefit that comes with marriage and filing jointly, and you'll lose that. So you've got to know what you're losing when you choose. Don't just quibly decide to, filing separate, that serves my purpose. No, how much money are you losing by doing that? So talk to a tax advisor is my advice on that. Yeah. With everything I've led up to at this point, it's all pertaining to federal loans. Really, there's no consideration given for private loans whatsoever, which is why the fifth question has to do with refinancing. And so I would just, because that was asked, put out there, when you change your federal debt into private loans, which is an option that you always have, you do lose every right we've just discussed. And so be careful about choosing to assume private debt, because you give up a lot of rights that you might not have been aware of. You might have even been using them, but then when a time comes when you need to use them and they're gone, that pain, we just want you to be educated before you make those decisions. So let me just briefly go through PSLF, because we've already talked a bit about it with most of us in the room. There's only 3 requirements. You have to have eligible loans. When you're in NSLDS, look at the names of your loans. The word direct has to be in the name of every loan. If there's a loan in there, like a Perkins loan, that's fine. You need to consolidate it into a direct consolidation loan. That makes it now eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So that's one requirement. You have to have eligible loans. Second requirement is you have to choose an eligible plan. I'll just be brief. What makes most sense is getting into the plan that's going to cost you the least. The lowest monthly payment plan is pay or repay. So which one do you want to be in? There's some differences, especially if you're married or not. There's some differences, but run your calculations in the calculator and it might help you determine. And then lastly, third requirement for PSLF, you have to do the work. And this is the hardest part to determine if you are doing the right work. But to make it most simple, I would say the entity paying your paycheck has to be a tax-exempt 501c3 entity. And so as you are interviewing, this is something you're wanting to ask. And I would hope that your future employer, especially where we're at into this process of having PSLF available, would know exactly what kind of entity they are and who is going to pay your paycheck, so that you understand what kind of employment agreement you're entering into. But if you meet all three of those requirements simultaneously and you make payments 120 times, that is 10 years, but it doesn't have to be consecutive. At the end of that 120th payment, you can apply to have the debt forgiven that's left. Now, you were making payments. They were small, affordable, repay or pay payments. What it could look like at the end of the 10th year is this. If you'd had that $200,000, did a 3-year residency in pediatrics, you then went into community health center for 7 years, and you stayed there intentionally. You finished your 10 years out. You now have, during those entire 10 years, paid over $130,000, but had forgiven $240,000. Remember, we borrowed $200,000. We had forgiven $240,000. So there's some principal and interest that got forgiven. Or if you had borrowed $250,000, we see a very similar situation in that we have paid for the 10 years $130,000, but we just have more forgiven. Here's the great thing about PSLF right now. It's not about how much debt you have. It is limitless. How much can be forgiven is limitless. And it's also not going to be taxed. It is a true tax-free forgiveness. It's a free forgiveness. So if you have not or even kind of interested, haven't done this yet, I just would tell you how you get started in PSLF is fill out the employment certification form. myfedloan.org, fill the ECF form out, the employment certification form. It just shows the Department of Education, the government, via your servicers, that you're interested in this program. And why could that be of value to you? Because what if you really are interested in it for the entire 10 years? Maybe not consecutively, but you are. And what if they make changes to PSLF and it's all those changes will affect anybody who's not yet in the program? Well, why would we want to try to secure our spot now just in case it won't be available later? See, they're talking about changing PSLF in the future, and that will potentially happen down the road. We just don't know what the changes will look like. We don't know who they will impact. We expect some grandfathering of some sort. We expect those who are on track to have loans forgiven to have their loans forgiven in the way they think they will be, because that would be pretty devastating to pull the rug out from under all of America's student loan borrowers. And mind you, you're not the only ones that are on track to have some debt forgiven. There's a lot of lawyers that are too, and so there could be a class action lawsuit, since PSLF is actually a contractual agreement. If you read your promissory note for your student loans, it's in there. So the government signed a contract with you, and they wrote into your contract PSLF and its existence. On the same note, it is run by the Congress, and Congress can do anything they want, including changing a contract. So we don't know how this is going to fall, but we expect the plan to be available to you if you want it to be. So maybe you're not sure. Okay, www.myfedloan.org. Fill out the ECF form. Just leave that door open. That's all I'm saying. Leave the door open. And what you will do immediately is have your servicers potentially change to Fed loan servicing right now while you're kind of filling this out. Because maybe you don't know what you're going to do down the way. But there could be valuable to you. And it could be something you just forget about later. Yes. Mm-hmm. Correct. You're right. That is correct. The clarification you just made is accurate. If you pay, underpay, or repay, or any of those income-driven plans, and you get to the end of the 20th, 25th year and have debt forgiven, that forgiveness amount is taxed. But in a 10-year PSLF program, which is not a repayment plan, it is a program that utilizes in combination one of the chosen repayment plans. But if you got the forgiveness via the 10-year PSLF forgiveness, that is not taxed. So yeah, we have a dynamic here where we're using programs that work together, but if we separate them and just focus on the standalone terms and conditions of each, we do have one that is a real true forgiveness, which is PSLF, and one that has a tax bill tied to it, which are the income-driven plans. You're completely on par. The future legislators will decide what PSLF looks like, so what should you do? If you have an opinion, you should make it heard with your congressmen and women, and I will give you a link to do that. It is here, aamc.action.org/PSLF stories. If you go there, you're going to see a lot of individual stories from all across the country, broken down by state, because we want to make sure we can target the correct senator or congressman or woman representative based on their the constituents they serve. And so go and see who's there, what they've said, and if you have something you would like to share with yours, we're happy to post it for you as well. And with that, it leads me to the last question that wraps me up. And so I don't want to be trite, but I do want to give you the rest of what you need to know. Consolidating or refinancing, should you do either? Possibly not, but then possibly there could be some benefits. So how do you know which way it is for you? First, with consolidating, when I say consolidation, I mean taking your federal loans. Remember, you log into NSLDS and you see this list of loans in your NSLDS account. You apply for a federal consolidation at studentloans.ed.gov. That is where you do federal consolidation, studentloans.ed.gov. And you will have the result of mashing all of those loans that were listed across your NSLDS page into one loan, because now they're consolidated. But is it a good idea? There are a lot of ways we can talk about this, but I'd rather just say to you, take 3 minutes tonight and take this quiz, aamc.org/first/consolidate quiz. There are 6 questions there. Answer those 6 questions, yes, no, or maybe. Each question has those options, and then you will know at the end of those 6 questions whether a federal consolidation will benefit you or be a waste of your time. It is that clear. And if it's not that clear, please do email me. Again, first@aamc.org. That's how you reach my team. Or you can reach me at nknight, K-N-I-G-H-T, at aamc.org. So that consolidation is sometimes necessary. And then other times we see people consolidate just because they thought they had to. And it doesn't hurt. It doesn't help. Again, it just wastes your time. Now, what about refinancing? See, consolidation is a word I use to say a process that you go through under the umbrella of the Department of Education. So you're leaving your federal loans federal. But when you refinance, you move the debt out of the federal, out from underneath that umbrella and take it to a private entity. And this little guy jumping up on the screen reminded me to tell you, some of you are interested in PSLF, do not consolidate. And the quiz actually may or may not make this real obvious, because that quiz was created for 4th-year medical students. So you guys do not consolidate if you have already made payments towards your public service loan forgiveness program. Because when you do a consolidation of the existing loans that you already have the ticker going, so maybe you've already made 45 payments towards your 120, what you do if you do a consolidation of that debt is you reset the counter. You go back to 0. So do not do that. I've heard horror stories. It has been done, and I am so sorry for the individuals that did that, because once it's done, it cannot be undone. So don't consolidate if you're already on track for PSLF. Just worst case, you're on track and you might have 2 bundles of loans, just let them ride down their individual track. So you might have some debt forgiven in 1 year, and 2 years later, you have another bundle of debt forgiven. So be it. Don't do a consolidation now. Now it's refinancing, where we take our federal debt and give it to, there's a lot of companies out there. You know their names. They're targeting you. I see their names on the sides of buildings here in New York City all the time, and they want you. They want to take your debt and help save you money. They don't care about saving you money. They want to take your debt and make the interest off of it. And so what I would tell you is that sometimes there are some private loans that make great sense, that will save you money. But the fact of the matter is, a private loan is often variable. The terms and conditions that come with a private loan are not flexible, and that can lead to causing you additional financial strain during a time when finances are limited. And so our overarching recommendation is that private loans definitely have a potential place in your future, especially if PSLF is nothing you want any part of. And private loans might be where you go to save money because you might be able to get into a lower interest rate, but it only makes sense when you are at the financial state you are waiting to be in, that final one where you have a good incoming money and you could pay that private loan off pretty aggressively if their rate started to go too high. See, again, back to private loans often have variable interest rates. And when you assume a variable interest rate, you're assuming risk. And so we just don't want you to bite off more than you can chew at this point and make sure you're financially stable before you go giving up the flexibility of federal student loans, where you could choose a postponement or a payment plan that has a lower monthly payment or allows you to wipe away half of the accruing interest like Repay does. We want to make sure you don't wash your hands of those options at a time when you actually might still need them. You just don't know it yet. It's all about the what if. And with that being said, we also have evaluation. It's not a quiz per se, it's things to consider. AAMC.org/first/should I refinance? Just a few things to consider if the really awesome refinance option is floated your way and you're like, I kind of think I could save money here. Well, look at those things to consider. Even go back to your financial aid office from whatever school you graduated from and run something by them. They should be happy to answer any questions you have, but we definitely are. You can run it by us as well. And so with that, I've gotten to the end of all the things you really need to know to successfully manage your student loan debt while you're here. And I will happily take more questions if you have any, or take your thoughts about, oh, thank you for all this. I thought you were going to talk about blank. Tell me, lay it on me, because I can talk about anything student loan related if you want to hear it. Yes. That's true. This first round, so we had our first round of forgiveness in 2017. And a lot of people were denied because they didn't meet the requirements that we just went over, those 3 requirements. And there's good reason why they didn't meet them accurately is because they were actually separated from school once the PSLF program rolled out. So they learned about it kind of third party. And so they just didn't get into PSLF the right way. They didn't have eligible loans. Maybe they're like, oh, I'm in public service work. And so they just started making payments to Sallie Mae, and then 10 years later, they applied to have their federal loans forgiven from Sallie Mae, or whatever name they go by now. And the fact was, no, that's not eligible. In order to get loans forgiven, they have to have the word direct in them. They have to be overseen by direct loans, which means you have to move your loans to Fed loan servicing. And so they missed some steps. And there's fault for that, from them missing it. That's not their fault that there was a poor rollout of PSLF. And for that reason, the Department of Education has created a fund of hundreds of millions of dollars for those borrowers it is set aside just for them to work the program accurately. And so that money is waiting for them to, well, finish it the right way. And so there's some acknowledgement of error on the Department of Ed side. And then also on their site, they added something this past year. It's a help button for PSLF. It's basically for any student loan borrower to click on and say, where am I at in this process? And it will evaluate where you are and tell you what you need to do. So they have basically created an online counselor for any PSLF pursuer. So they're trying. But yes, you're right. There's a lot of people that thought they were getting it and they didn't, for a number of reasons. Follow up? It's okay. Yeah, 501c3, that's fine. If you're working full-time for a 501c3 entity to show that you are in public service work, and it's full-time, then you have met the requirement for PSLF. You are working full-time for a nonprofit. The other requirement, it has to do with the repayment plan that you're in. If you are simultaneously working elsewhere, you are earning extra income, and so that extra income will be reflected in your income-driven repayment plan. So it could cause you to pay a greater amount while those funds are coming in, but it's still allowed, yes. You just will be minimizing the ultimate forgiveness you end up receiving. But it definitely is possible to do both at the same time if it makes sense at the end of the day. And if you can manage all of that at once. But that's not my place. I don't want to talk about that. I'm sorry I even said that. Any other questions? I really appreciate the time that you've taken. You guys have been very attentive, and I know that you can't have had much energy. It's the end of the day. So resource, AAMC.org/first. Everything there has to do with you and, well, you, student loan borrower, has to do with managing of student loans. But then specifically, you have a question, you have a problem, first at AAMC.org. We have answers. Or just email me directly, Knight, Knight, at AAMC.org. And having said that, I would wish you all a good night. And from what I read on the website at my hotel, apparently happy hour doesn't end here until 7 o'clock. So happy hour. I'm just kidding. I mean, because you need to use your funds wisely while you're here. So go by the store on the way home. Anything else you'd like to say, Gabrielle? Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to say anything, Lauren?